Welcome to the Work Matters podcast. In each episode, talking with thought leaders and executives, Purpose Works founder Thomas Bertels explores what it takes to make work more productive, valuable, impactful, and meaningful. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to the Work Matters podcast, where we explore what leaders can do to make work more productive, valuable, meaningful, and impactful. Our topic today is corporate soul, and our guest is Ralf Specht. Ralf, after 2 decades with McCann Erickson in various executive roles, was a founding partner of Spark 44, which was an innovative, industry-first joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover. And under his leadership, the venture grew to something like 1,200 people operating in 18 countries. Ralf is the author of Building Corporate Soul, and he also developed the Soul System, which is a framework that powers culture and success for any business. He also wrote a second book, Beyond the Startup, that actually talks about the operational innovations that enabled Spark 44 to grow as rapidly as it did. So we're excited to have Ralf on the show today, and I love his driving vision to make soulless companies a thing of the past. So Ralf, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
You're on a mission to make soulless companies a thing of the past. Well, what is for you corporate soul, and why does it matter?
Probably everybody on this call or on this podcast agrees to the fact that every company has got a culture. You can't have a company without a culture. And probably also everybody agrees to the fact that if you have a great culture, it's better for business. Companies with soul differentiate from companies with just culture by one single fact. They have achieved full integrity of words and actions. And so any strategy conversation is not just like empty words, but actually words with meaning. And not just words with meaning on a PowerPoint slide or behind the receptionist's wall, but words with meaning that actually impact everything, every behavior inside the company. And hence, the Soul System, which is the framework that you mentioned, has got 3 parts, which is at the heart, it's the shared purpose. The second level I call the shared understanding, which includes vision, mission, values, and spirit. And the third level is the shared behaviors. And the shared behaviors, obviously, well, they indicate whether everything that has been written and nicely thought of and debated and whatever is actually finding its way into the reality of the business.
So your book is full of interesting examples and case studies. And you also have the Soul Index. So what are some of your favorite examples in the research that you've done?
As you quite rightly say, there's when I started to research on companies with soul, I looked at 2 groups of companies, actually. I looked at companies that were not long ago startup companies, so they were founded probably in around the early 2000s. And I looked at legacy companies that had been around for ages and centuries in some cases. Both categories actually offer food for thought and key learnings for entrepreneurs and leaders to actually take on board and leverage for their activity. The one example I think of the first category, companies that were created in the early 2000s, that I think is a real role model and probably the best example that I've seen of the thoughtfulness that went into the strategic work, but then also applying that strategic work in the everyday behaviors is LinkedIn. And I think what's especially cool about LinkedIn is they have been able to actually maintain their culture, their soul, even when they were acquired by Microsoft just a few years back. Their shared purpose is as straightforward as it can be because it just simply says to facilitate professional networking. So their mission is to connect the world's professionals, to make them more productive and successful. And the values are, I think, a masterpiece in terms of values that are not just, again, very often empty words without meaning, their values have the ability actually to strike a chord internally and externally. So they give a lot of direction to people inside the company. They've had 7 values: members first. So it's a customer-centric organization. Relationships matter, of course. It's about professional networking. Then some attitudinal values: be open, be honest, and constructive. But then is about setting the bar high. They say demand excellence, take intelligent risks, and act like an owner. So the very entrepreneurial approach to the company. I'm reading this to you now, but when you think about it, you are a new employee at LinkedIn and it's your day one. If these are clear to you before you get there, you will be positively surprised that it's actually happening.
You started off by saying, you looked at like both categories, right? So companies that just been around for 20 years, LinkedIn, right? And companies that have been around for a very long time. I can imagine that startups, right, they oftentimes carry the personality of the founder with them, right? I mean, think Jeff Bezos, right? Steve Jobs, right? These larger than life characters. So I think it's probably easier there that kind of like the soul of the company probably has like some of the values that might shape these entrepreneurs. But what have you seen like with companies that've been around for a long time, right? Where that original founder is like, long forgotten in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, everybody remembers Conrad Hilton, but I mean, that's been like more than 100 years ago. And so Conrad Hilton's no longer alive, and the company has gone through bad times. So Hilton's one example, one great example, I think, of a company that nearly went bust in the early 2000s. That place has changed significantly, and Hilton has changed significantly. And one of the reasons they have changed significantly is because they have finally understood that they're in a service business, and it's a business of people serving people. And so, if you don't treat your people in a fair way, in a just way, then how can you expect them to be the best they can give to their guests? So they created this hospitality for all, which looks into hospitality for their people. We all use our frequent flyer miles to travel to great places. They can spend time in Hilton hotels wherever they want, whenever they want. There are no blackout periods. I never thought about staff rooms in a hotel, because like you're getting in a hotel, there's the lobby, there's their lounges, there's the bar, the restaurant, your guest rooms, and so on and so forth. So all of this is great, but for staff in a hotel, it didn't used to be that great. And one of the things that Hilton management decided very early on, like 2007, 8, 9, was to actually make sure that the staff experience, when they had a pause and when they had a time for a break, actually lived up to the guest experience. The staff lounges were improved significantly. And so that had an enormous effect, because all of a sudden they just felt like people are taking care of us too, as they're expecting us to take care of others. So Hilton is a great example. Lego is a great example too. A similar story. They lost their soul probably also in the early 2000s, and they brought in a non-family CEO for the very first time. One of the things that went wrong at Lego was the designers of Lego kits were actually not necessarily fans of Lego. So they might have been great designers, but they didn't really feel the power that playing with Lego actually provides. And he put the company on a complete new mission, and making sure that everybody understood the power of Lego. And when you look at RepTrack, the global reputation tracking, and Lego's been in the top 10 for the past 11 years, and it's probably, besides the Walt Disney companies, they're the only 2 companies that made it to the top 10 every single year. Building corporate soul and building a culture that is thriving for all its stakeholders is a marathon, and both Lego and Hilton have been doing that perfectly, I think.
I was just thinking about my own recent Lego store experience. My son is heavily into it, and you're absolutely right. I remember talking to one of the employees there. was very kind, walked me through the store, showed me some of the special things they have. And you realize that the people who work there really have a passion for the product. They're really, they're brickheads. So it's really fascinating to see. And the other thought that came to me as I was listening to you is, I mean, what you're talking about is a little bit like in contradiction to like the textbook focus on shareholder value. Like you're talking about care for the employees, talk about connecting to the customer, right? So that's like a multi-stakeholder model there, right? That basically says it's not all about, the Wall Street and the stock price, right? Which I think is really interesting. I think it's also really hard for leaders to do, given like the quarterly pressures that they are under to produce those numbers.
You've quoted my vision statement to make soulless companies a thing of the past, but there's also a mission statement. And the mission statement is to make the leadership behaviors which build soul synonymous with the behaviors which build success. When I looked at the companies during my research that qualified for being a good example for certain activities inside their firm that support the idea of building corporate soul, it was fascinating to see that all of these companies are successful. They might have had a phase like Lego or Hilton of non-success, but they figured it out and came back stronger. The idea of you either have a great culture or you are successful, I think, is the first mistake that people do. Obviously, when you build a company from scratch, it's always easier because you don't have any legacies that you have to worry about, and you can build it and design it the way you want. If you have your house in order in terms of your corporate culture, and you got a fully committed staff, and you got great relationships with all stakeholders across the board, and you're managing your communities well, and you're dealing in a good way with your suppliers, and taking care of your customers, unless you got a product that is kind of outdated, you will be doing well, or a service that is outdated. So I think there's never been a better time to start looking at it as is today. I mean, the book contains the Soul Index, which is a performance ranking of companies that actually put employee engagement and satisfaction first or very high. And the index results basically confirm that it pays off big time. So there's lots of tech companies in the thing. So over the 5 years from 2016 to 2020, the index companies basically even outperformed NASDAQ by nearly 20 percentage points over those 5 years, and obviously were 4 or 5 times higher than S&P and Dow Jones. So if anybody says, well, I can't afford culture, then I'm just saying, well, probably you haven't looked at it carefully enough, because it's not that you can't afford culture. You need culture. You need a strong culture, and you need a thriving culture to actually survive in this workplace. And we're all talking about the talent war, and talent is scarce, and people resign. If you have a culture that sucks, one thing is for sure, you'll have more people leaving than you can find great new people to come on board. So it's actually a leverage, a lever for great work. And there's this study from O.C. Tanner, which looked at what I call companies with soul. They call companies with a thriving culture, and employees in these cultures are 13 times happier, and the companies are twice as likely to have increased revenues. People have 3 times less probability to experience burnouts, and the companies have a 3 times less probability to face layoffs. So, I mean, you look at all these numbers, and it's just like, yeah, why don't you get it?
Yeah. No, it's like, and it's very convincing, right? So Ralf, okay, I looked at the numbers. You convinced me. What do I do? Where do I start?
I explained the shared purpose, the shared understanding, and the shared behaviors. And if you take the shared purpose, for instance, and what does it mean, right? Shared purpose is all about the being. And there's 2 questions I think that you need to ask yourself. And one is you yourself. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And then there's a second question. which goes beyond yourself, which is like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And this is a very simple question, and it's a very, very tough answer. And I'm not sure everybody has got an answer for these simple questions. That's, I think, where everyone needs to start, and that's a question related to me, myself, and the company. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? So once you get clarity here, and I mean, in most cases, you will have a leadership team. So there's not just you, there's a few of your colleagues. And asking that question, why are we here? And hearing all the answers and mapping the answers and starting to find out whether there is common ground or whether there is like a very dysfunctional connection in terms of, yeah, well, he's here for that, she's here for something else, and he doesn't even know yet. Starting a reflection process at the leadership team, I think, is the most important starting point. And once there's a bit of alignment and you start to craft that kind of shared purpose statement that makes everybody feel like, well, yeah, actually, that's why I'm here. And I think you've taken a great first step. And as per the LinkedIn example, you look at vision, mission, values, and spirit. We're talking about the shared understanding, and the shared understanding is about believing, right? So shared purpose was about being, shared understanding is about believing. There's two questions again that you need to ask yourself. So what do we believe in? Do we believe in that shared purpose? Do we believe in that vision and that vision and the values and the spirit? And if so, congratulations. How do we shape belief in others? Right? I mean, it's great that we all think this is the greatest thing since bread came sliced, but actually doesn't mean anything if you're not able to make sure that others like to follow you. So, to a degree, is a bit of a missionary thing. Um, that's why it's called believing. But belief is ultimately powerful. I mean, we all know this. I mean, when people believe in something, they can move mountains, and nothing really gets in the way. And so once the being and believing are sorted, we get to the belonging. And I mean, there was this McKinsey study last October about why people are leaving the companies in spades. And the number one reason why employees were leaving was they didn't feel any sense of belonging. So belonging is the critical glue for everything. And again, two questions. One, what does it feel like to belong here? Goes back to the spirit. And how do we want the culture to be? So how does it feel like? What does it feel like to belong here? And then once you're clear about that, so you get the desired state, the big question for every leader, and that's like team leaders and everybody, is how do we create belonging for others? How can we make sure the others actually feel the same sense of belonging? And if you got people that feel that sense of belonging, they're not going to go easily and just resign because everybody's resigning and, yeah, I don't like it anymore. I think you get a sense of commitment. And I've always been saying that commitment is one of the most undervalued resources a company has. Because if you got a colleague or people on your team that fully live the purpose of your company, I mean, that's the best thing you can have. When we were building Spark 44 and grew to the extent that you talked about, and when I left or stepped down as CEO, I received those massive messages from my colleagues that inspired actually me writing the book Building Corporate Soul. And the red thread in these messages was twofold. One is I've never worked for a company with a stronger culture than this one, and number two was about my role as a leader to many of them, and they said, well, you saw things in me that I never thought I would be able to accomplish, but you trusted me to do that, and actually I'm proud of what I achieved, and without you trusting me, I would have never dared to do it. So that trust is really a critical thing. I mean, as a leader, you need to be able to recognize the abilities of your people. And my experience is more often than not, people are capable of much more than they think what they're capable of. But you got to look at them with open eyes and open ears and see what they are able to do and connect that with the tasks that you think need to get done. And if I look back, I'd say, well, the ratio of when it worked out to when it didn't was probably 9-1. And the 9 that succeeded, it's most of the time been a big surprise to those guys because they felt they weren't up for it or they weren't ready for it. But trusting people and giving them the sense that they are up to it and they can deliver it. Sometimes even as a leader, you experience results that you didn't expect in a positive way, and that's the most rewarding thing.
Really appreciate the conversation and you sharing your insights into, right, how do you build organizations that have sold. I love the framework, but what I like even more are those questions that you walked us through, starting with purpose. And I think those are, very helpful for anybody to go through. And to your point, right, start engaging the organization. This is not something you can do in a conference room to the organization and say, here's our purpose and vision, right? Go forth and multiply, right? So really appreciate you sharing that. Where should people go if they want to learn more about the Soul System and your work, besides obviously buying the book, which I know is on Amazon, right? But where do they go?
There's a dedicated website which is called buildingcorporatesoul.com. And so on that website, there's some initial information about the Soul System, the context. You can sign up for a newsletter, and you get a sample chapter for free, so that you can take an initial read. There's a test actually on the site that you can do to check whether your company's got soul, and there's, I think, 12 or 13 questions about the various elements of the Soul System and how your company performs in relation to those. There's also, for those that are interested, a section which is called the Soul Experience, which is about the consulting that some great colleagues of mine are offering, and a set of seminars that people can book, which are going to be hybrid, so that and all virtual, to participate actually in understanding the leadership behaviors that build soul, and how to do that when you're running a company or leading a team.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you having you on the podcast. And for our listeners also, don't forget to check out the other episodes of the Work Matters podcast, and please subscribe so you never miss one.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, share, or comment. Until next time, let's make work matter.